When my son chuckled and said, "You'll never be as good as my wife," something in me snapped, not loudly. Not visibly. But quietly, like a thin thread finally breaking after holding too much weight for too long. That night, I smiled at him. I even served him another spoon of stew. But inside, I whispered to myself, then tell her to cook her own life when I'm done with mine, because what neither of them knew was that I had a plan, years in the making, one that would show both my son and his smug wife exactly what it meant to underestimate me. My name's Patricia, 64 years old. I raised my son, Ethan, alone after his father passed when he was just 12. We weren't rich. I worked double shifts as a nurse, skipped meals, and wore second-hand uniforms so Ethan could attend the best school in town. I used to think, one day, he'll understand. One day, he'll be proud, and for a while, I thought he was. When he graduated, he hugged me and said, "Mom, everything I am is because of you." I believed him. Foolishly, then came her. Clara was beautiful, yes. Educated, elegant, and entitled. The kind of woman who looks at a working-class mother and sees a servant in disguise. When Ethan brought her home for dinner, she smiled at me the way people smile at a stray dog they don't want to touch, and from that first night, I knew she didn't want a mother-in-law. She wanted competition, one she thought she could easily beat. At first, I tried. I bought her flowers, helped clean their new apartment, even taught her Ethan's favorite meals. But slowly, the little insults began. "Oh, Patricia, you don't need to cook old-fashioned food. Ethan prefers lighter meals now. Maybe you should rest, you're not young anymore." Each word, gentle as silk, sharp as glass. "Ethan, head laugh, brush it off. Come on, Mom, don't be so sensitive." The last straw came at a family dinner, my birthday, of all days. I spent all afternoon cooking, roast lamb, mashed potatoes, apple pie, Ethan's childhood favorites. When I placed the food on the table, he looked at his wife and said, "Careful, babe, Mom's meals are loaded with butter." Then he chuckled and added, "You'll never be as good as my wife." The table went silent. My heart stopped. I looked at him, my son, my flesh and blood, and saw not love, but arrogance, and in that moment, I decided, they both needed a lesson they would never forget. Now, I'm not a vengeful woman by nature. But I am clever. And patience has always been my greatest weapon. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out. I simply smiled. Because I knew something they didn't. See, while they lived in their fancy suburban home, the one Ethan thought he bought, it was actually my name on the deed. After my husband passed, I had quietly invested in real estate. Over the years, I bought 2 rental houses and 1 small property under a trust ID created for Ethan, with myself as trustee. He thought the house they lived in was bought with his down payment, but that down payment came from a transfer ID made from the trust. He never asked. And I never told him. So when I smiled that night, it wasn't the smile of a hurt mother. It was the smile of a chess player moving her queen. Over the next few months, things got worse. Clara began redecorating my house, my late husband's home. She said she was making it more modern. Out went my husband's armchair. Out went the family portraits. She even replaced my lace curtains with gray blinds. One afternoon, I found her in my garden, cutting down my roses. "My allergies," she said with a smile. I could have screamed. But I didn't. I simply said, "It's fine, dear," because I knew every snip of her scissors was earning her a future she wouldn't like. Ethan, meanwhile, grew distant. Calls became rare, visits shorter, until one day, he said it, "Mom, maybe it's time you think about moving into a retirement place. Clara says you'll be more comfortable there." Retirement place. That night, I cried. Not because of the insult, but because I realized the boy I raised no longer existed. In his place stood a man molded by greed and pride. So I stopped crying and started planning. My late husband always said, "Pat, never let emotions ruin your logic." So I went to my lawyer, Mr. Howard, a quiet man who'd helped me set up the trust years ago. I told him, "Howard, I want to make a few changes." He looked at me with concern. "You're sure, Patricia? It's your son's inheritance." I smiled. Exactly. Over the next few weeks, I transferred ownership of the house, their precious suburban mansion, from the trust to my personal name. Then, I prepared a will. Everything, every cent, every property, would go not to Ethan, but to my granddaughter, Lily, his own daughter, who adored me and had nothing of her parents' arrogance. But there was a catch: Lily wouldn't inherit until she turned 25. Until then, everything would remain in the Patricia Green Foundation, a charitable fund in my name. And guess who would manage that foundation until then? Not Ethan. Not Clara. Me. A month later, I invited them for dinner. Ethan arrived late. Clara was dressed in designer silk. She didn't even greet me, just said, "Oh, you're still cooking these old recipes?" I served them politely. Halfway through dinner, I looked at Ethan and said, "I've decided to sell the house." He nearly choked on his wine. "What? You can't. This is our home," I smiled. "No, darling. It's my home. The deed's in my name. Always has been." The color drained from Clara's face. I continued, "I'll be moving to the lake cottage next month. You'll have 2 weeks to vacate." Clara's fork clattered. "You can't do that. We've redecorated, renovated," I interrupted, "at your expense, I hope." Then I stood up, slowly, my voice calm but sharp. "You told me I'd never be as good as your wife, Ethan. You were right. I'm better. I built your life, your home, and your comfort. And now, I'm taking them back." Clara tried to speak, but I wasn't finished. "You two wanted me out of your life? Congratulations. You'll soon have exactly that." The next 2 weeks were delightful. Clara ran around frantically, calling realtors, arguing with lawyers, but the papers were airtight. They had no claim. Ethan tried to plead, to apologize, but his words felt rehearsed. When he finally said, "Mom, we're family," I simply replied, "Family doesn't laugh when their mother's heart breaks." They moved out on a rainy Tuesday. I watched from the porch, holding a cup of tea. Clara glared at me as the movers packed her furniture into a truck. Ethan avoided my eyes. When they drove away, I felt no guilt, only peace. I moved to the lake cottage, a quiet, beautiful place I'd bought years ago for my retirement. Lily visited often. She'd help me garden, read books, and laugh like a child should. One afternoon, she looked at me and asked, "Grandma, why don't Mommy and Daddy visit anymore?" I smiled softly. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, people forget who helped them grow. But one day, they'll remember." And she nodded, wiser than her years. Months later, I heard from a neighbor that Ethan and Clara were struggling. Their new house? Rented. Their business? Failing. Apparently, Clara's father had stopped financing them after hearing how they treated me. Word travels fast in polite society. I never called to gloat. I didn't need to. Revenge is sweetest when silence does the talking. Instead, I focused on my foundation, funding education for single mothers. Every time I saw one of them succeed, I felt a satisfaction far deeper than anger. Still, sometimes, late at night, I'd remember Ethan's chuckle, and I'd whisper to the wind, "You were right, son. I'll never be as good as your wife. Because I'll always be better." 2 years later, Ethan showed up at my cottage. Alone. He looked thinner, older, the arrogance gone from his face. "Mom," he said quietly, "Clara left me." I poured him tea. "I'm sorry to hear that." He sighed. "I was wrong, Mom. About everything. I let her poison me against you." I studied him. For the first time in years, I saw the boy I'd raised. But forgiveness isn't always instant. "Ethan," I said gently, "sometimes life has to take away everything so we finally see what mattered." He nodded, tears in his eyes. Before leaving, he said, "Lily misses you. Can we visit together next time?" I smiled. "Of course." But I never mentioned the will. He didn't need to know that one day, everything would go to the only person who had truly loved me without conditions, his daughter. Today, I sit by the lake, watching the sunset reflect off the water. At 64, I feel stronger than I ever did at 40. My story isn't about revenge anymore. It's about justice. About reminding the world, And every son or daughter who forgets that mothers are not furniture to be replaced when you find someone new. We are the foundation you stand on. And when you mock the foundation, you'd better know how to build your own house. So yes, my son chuckled once and said, "You'll never be as good as my wife." But now, when he visits, humbler, wiser, broken, he doesn't laugh anymore. He calls me mom again. And though I've forgiven, I'll never forget the night that taught me my worth. Because that was the night I stood up, smiled, and said, "Then tell her to build her own life, because I'm done building yours." And that, my friends, is how a 64-year-old mother taught her ungrateful son and his arrogant wife that love isn't weakness, it's power. So if anyone ever tells you, you'll never be as good as someone else, just smile and make sure they live long enough to see how wrong they were.